The chamber of the Galactic Council was no longer a place of authority, but of panic. Voices that once spoke with calm arrogance now shook with desperation. Holograms of entire fleets destroyed filled the air, each report worse than the last, each casualty list longer than the one before. For centuries, these rulers believed themselves untouchable, the apex of civilization, the guiding hand of the galaxy. But now, with human vengeance spreading like wildfire, every word uttered in that hall carried the weight of survival. It had not always been this way. When humanity first appeared on the galactic stage, the Council dismissed them as fragile upstarts, creatures too dependent on primitive worlds, too fractured by their own divisions. They were judged by their youth as a space-faring race, compared against empires that had ruled the stars for millennia. The Council had seen hundreds of minor species rise and fall, and they expected the same here. That arrogance shaped their cruelty. The first blows against humanity were not warnings. They were massacres. Colonies along the rim were bombarded, their populations eradicated in the name of maintaining order. Civilian transports were hunted and destroyed, their remains left drifting in silence. Earth itself endured the humiliation of orbiting fleets, demands of submission, and the mockery of being told they should be grateful to be noticed at all. The Council wanted obedience, not coexistence. They demanded tribute, labor, and silence. Humanity gave them defiance instead. At first, the Council treated this defiance as amusing, a small inconvenience. They issued decrees that promised annihilation if humans resisted further, confident the threat would be enough. But the humans did not yield. They fought with what little they had, and when that was taken, they fought with less. What the Council saw as stubbornness, humanity defined as survival. For every colony lost, another group of survivors escaped into the void, vowing revenge. For every ship destroyed, 2 more were built from scavenged wreckage. And for every massacre committed, the memory hardened into fuel for vengeance. Now, as the Council huddled together, their superiority lay in ruins. The fleets they once boasted about had been shattered by human ambushes. Their supply lines were cut, their admirals routed, their border worlds aflame. Even the strongest member races of the Council had watched their proud flagships burn in battles they once considered unwinnable. The humans had taken the very lessons of cruelty taught to them, and reflected it back with precision. No enemy could predict their strikes. No world could feel safe. Reports filled the chamber of human fleets advancing faster than logistics should have allowed. Entire systems went dark without warning, their defenses bypassed, their leaders executed, their wealth seized to fund the next wave. The Council's analysts could not explain how humanity was achieving such momentum. They could not understand how a species that had once begged for recognition had turned into a force that even the oldest empires could not withstand. Fear settled in where arrogance had lived for centuries. Some voices in the chamber still clung to denial, insisting negotiations would restore balance, that humanity would accept reparations and halt their advance if the right words were chosen. But those voices were drowned out by the reality flashing on every screen. The humans had not answered calls for peace. They had not acknowledged offers of wealth, territory, or surrender. They were silent, except in battle. Their fleets spoke for them. Their vengeance carried the message no emissary could soften. For the first time in living memory, the Council understood what it meant to be powerless. Their pleas for diplomacy rang hollow, because deep inside they knew the truth: humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for justice, justice that demanded more than apologies, more than treaties, more than reparations. They wanted the galaxy to remember what had been done to them, and to pay for it in full. The chamber that once resounded with orders to conquer now trembled under the weight of fear. Every delegate understood that their empire's crimes had not been forgotten, and that humanity would not be satisfied until those crimes were avenged. The question was no longer whether the Council could stop humanity. It was whether anything could stop them at all. When the Council unleashed its terror, they believed humanity would shatter and vanish into history like so many other conquered species. What they failed to grasp was that survival was woven into human nature. Where others bent to power, humanity clenched its fists and endured. The devastation that should have ended them instead became the catalyst for something greater. Scattered colonies, broken fleets, and shattered governments did not remain fractured for long. Across light years, survivors found each other. Old rivalries and divisions that had once defined human civilization crumbled under the weight of shared loss. Nations that had warred with one another for centuries now fought side by side. Former adversaries united not out of trust, but out of necessity, driven by the conviction that only unity could grant them the strength to strike back. Humanity was never the strongest in technology, never the wealthiest in resources, but no other species adapted with such speed. Where alien empires relied on millennia of tradition, humans thrived in chaos. Every colony learned to become self-sufficient. Miners forged weapons in hidden foundries. Scientists scavenged from wreckage, reverse engineering alien technology, and repurposing it in ways its creators had never considered. Soldiers trained in conditions designed to break their bodies, yet came out harder, sharper, relentless. From these beginnings rose fleets unlike anything the Council had prepared to face. Human ships bore the scars of improvisation, but inside them burned a discipline and purpose that no empire could match. Every vessel carried not just weapons, but the memory of the lives lost in massacres, the cries of children buried in rubble, the promise that humanity would never again kneel before tyrants. The Council had created an enemy that did not simply want survival, it demanded retribution. Stories spread across the human colonies, becoming the lifeblood of resistance. Tales of merchant vessels converting into warships, of engineers working with bare hands and airless hulls to forge cannons, of soldiers who fought to their last breath even as their stations burned around them. One name after another became legend, not for victory alone, but for defiance that inspired millions. Humanity did not fight because it believed it could win. It fought because surrender was no longer possible. The Council could not comprehend this mindset. They had broken countless species before with swift displays of power, with overwhelming force, with fear. But humans grew sharper under fear. Every atrocity committed against them was remembered, catalogued, and engraved into a single vow: there would be no forgiveness. That vow spread from Earth to the farthest outpost, uniting billions under one cause. It was not spoken as a political slogan. It was whispered as truth: never forgive, never forget. In hidden systems beyond Council patrols, humanity prepared. Guerrilla fleets struck suddenly and vanished into the dark, leaving wreckage behind without explanation. Council commanders grew paranoid, unable to predict where or when the next attack would come. Supply convoys disappeared without trace, their cargo reappearing as munitions in human hands. Even isolated colonies long thought destroyed sent transmissions of resistance, proof that the fire of vengeance had reached every corner of human space. The Council's early victories had forged something far more dangerous than submission. They had welded humanity into a single will. No bribes could divide them, no threats could break them, no promises could distract them. Revenge was no longer a matter of choice, it had become identity. To be human meant to remember the fallen, and to carry their memory into war. The galaxy soon realized that the humans were not rising simply to reclaim what was lost. They were rising to dismantle the very order that had believed itself eternal. For every world taken from them, they would take 2. For every life erased, they would claim 1,000. This was not war for conquest or resources, it was vengeance incarnate. And vengeance does not negotiate. As human fleets multiplied, as colonies bristled with weapons, as whispers of their defiance grew into a roar, the Council understood too late the scale of what they had created. Humanity had been underestimated, mocked, brutalized, but in forging that crucible of suffering, the Council had awoken something unstoppable. What once was considered a fragile species had become a storm, relentless and unyielding, carrying with it the weight of every crime committed against them. And as the storm gathered strength, the humans made their purpose clear: survival had already been achieved. What remained was the reckoning. The first major clash that shook the galaxy was not a skirmish but a calculated strike. A Council fleet gathered at Vera's gate, certain that their overwhelming numbers would crush the human presence in the sector. Yet when the battle began, the Council discovered that numbers meant nothing against enemies who did not fight by the rules. Human ships emerged from concealed positions within asteroid fields, striking the fleet's flanks, cutting supply vessels before the admirals could even react. When the Council ordered pursuit, the humans vanished, only to reappear at the rear, isolating ships and destroying them in precise, merciless waves. By the time the engagement ended, the fleet was nothing but wreckage, its survivors drifting in silence, left as warnings for anyone who thought humanity could be cornered. From there, momentum belonged to Earth's descendants. At Uran Station, a fortress that had stood for centuries as the Council's symbol of dominance, human marines boarded with improvised breaching gear, tearing through reinforced bulkheads with weapons designed for mining equipment. Within hours, the garrison had been slaughtered, the station's command broadcast forced to transmit the image of its fall to every Council world. The message was unmistakable: no stronghold was beyond reach. The Empire's pride was bleeding out in front of its subjects, and it was humans holding the knife. Every victory was brutal not only in execution but in intent. Humanity made sure its enemies knew why they were dying. Open channels carried the voices of commanders reciting the names of massacred colonies as they ordered orbital bombardments. Survivors of Council atrocities spoke in unison with the thunder of railguns, each shot punctuating their testimony. To the galaxy at large, these broadcasts were chilling. To the humans, they were justice. The Council could not adapt. Their war manuals had been crafted over millennia, perfected for wars of attrition, not for an opponent who thrived in chaos. Human commanders ignored convention, embracing risk with a ferocity no other species could match. Fleets feigned retreat only to collapse like a closing fist, trapping enemies in killing zones. Battles were fought in atmospheres where Council ships struggled, or inside nebulae where sensors failed but human ingenuity thrived. No engagement was straightforward. Every encounter was a lesson in terror. What unsettled the Council most was not simply the defeats but the speed at which humanity evolved. Ships that began as crude hybrids of scavenged parts quickly transformed into predators more advanced than their counterparts. Captured technology was stripped, repurposed, and redeployed before its designers could adapt. In months, humanity advanced by centuries. Weapons that had once been considered prototypes were mass-produced. The balance of power shifted, not gradually, but violently, as if the galaxy itself had chosen to accelerate their rise. Fear began spreading faster than news of the battles. Civilian worlds on the Council's border whispered of approaching vengeance fleets that spared no garrison. Merchants abandoned routes, unwilling to risk the chance of encountering human raiders. Refugees fled from strongholds once considered unassailable, convinced nothing could withstand the tide. Even Council soldiers, drilled from birth to obey without question, began deserting. Facing humans was no longer duty, it was a death sentence. And yet, even in this chaos, humanity never struck blindly. Their wrath was deliberate. They did not waste fire on those who had not raised weapons. They focused on the architects of suffering, the fleets, the generals, the political centers that had once celebrated the crushing of Earth's colonies. Every attack was a reminder: this was not conquest for expansion, but a reckoning designed to dismantle the very foundations of the Council. Alien leaders, watching system after system fall, could no longer deny the truth. The humans had become what every empire feared: an enemy that could not be broken, an enemy whose losses only fueled its hunger for retribution. Each defeat was not simply a loss of territory but a demonstration of helplessness, proof that the Council's power was a hollow myth. In less than a generation, humanity had shifted from prey to predator. They were no longer the fragile newcomers mocked for their youth. They had become the arbiters of consequence, the force that turned arrogance into ashes. Battles once thought decisive now stood as monuments to the Council's downfall, each wreckage a testament that the age of human vengeance was not approaching, it had already begun. The turning point came not on a battlefield but in transmissions carried across the stars. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council humbled itself before an enemy. Delegates who once demanded submission now spoke in tones laced with desperation. Their fleets were in ruins, their borders collapsing, their wealth drained. They had nothing left but words, and so they offered them in abundance. Promises of reparations, territories ceded, technology handed over, all were laid out in frantic declarations, each plea more urgent than the last. The galaxy watched as the most powerful empires groveled to the very species they had tried to exterminate. The Council expected negotiation to halt the advance. It was the only language they understood: compromise, bargaining, the exchange of threats for concessions. But when their envoys reached humanity, the response was silence, broken only by the continued thunder of advancing fleets. The Council tried again, this time more direct. They broadcast offers of surrender over open channels, their leaders appearing in holograms, voices shaking as they admitted fault. To them, the act of acknowledging guilt was monumental. To humanity, it was nothing more than a hollow confession spoken too late. The message humanity finally delivered was not long, not wrapped in diplomatic formality. It was one sentence, repeated across every frequency, carved into the memory of every world that heard it. Until revenge is complete, there will be no negotiations. Those words did more damage than any fleet. They cut through the illusion that treaties or apologies could undo centuries of bloodshed. They made clear that vengeance was not a phase, not a bargaining chip, but the very foundation of humanity's campaign. Panic rippled through the Council as the meaning sank in. Negotiation was the weapon that had preserved their dominance for ages, the tool that broke rebellions before they could become wars. Now it was useless. Humanity could not be bribed, persuaded, or deceived. They sought not advantage but finality. Every attempt at peace was ignored, every emissary dismissed, every proposal answered with silence or fire. The Council was no longer speaking to a species, it was speaking to the echo of every atrocity it had committed, and that echo demanded blood. For the alien delegates, this defiance was unthinkable. Their histories were filled with species who had bent the knee the moment diplomacy was offered. They had crushed rebellions, then rebuilt them under new treaties, always ensuring their authority remained unchallenged. But humanity tore that cycle apart. To them, negotiation was not mercy but an insult, an attempt to erase the dead with signatures on parchment. They did not want forgiveness. They wanted the galaxy to learn that actions had consequences that no treaty could erase. Reports flooded the council chambers of worlds burning even after surrender signals were sent, of admirals executed despite laying down arms, of fortresses razed though their governors begged for mercy. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was consistency. Humanity had warned them with its single sentence. There would be no exceptions, no shortcuts, no backdoor escapes. Revenge was not negotiable. Fear turned to despair as entire civilizations under council rule realized there was no shield left to hide behind. The humans had shown that pleas would not soften them, and so populations began to abandon hope of survival. Entire sectors fell into chaos, not from human attack, but from the paralysis of knowing that negotiations had failed. Allies of the council whispered of betrayal, questioning whether to abandon it entirely. The foundation of galactic order crumbled faster than fleets could fall. In this silence, the council's leaders understood the truth too late. The humans had not come to the table as diplomats. They had come as executioners. Negotiation required mutual recognition, but the humans did not recognize the council as equals, only as perpetrators. The weight of their crimes could not be bargained down. The galaxy that once bowed to the council now bowed to the reality that justice, in human hands, was absolute. The words repeated endlessly. Until revenge is complete, there will be no negotiations. With every world consumed, with every empire humbled, those words became prophecy. Humanity had no need to argue, no need to explain, no need to promise a future of peace. Their silence was its own declaration. The council begged, but begging could not erase the past. The march of vengeance did not slow. System after system fell, each one consumed with the same relentless precision that had already reduced fleets to ash. Humanity did not pause to consolidate, did not linger over victory, did not allow its enemies time to recover. They advanced like a tide, sweeping away everything in their path, their determination unshaken by surrender signals or desperate appeals. To the galaxy, it became clear that this was not a war for territory or dominance. It was a reckoning carried out with the cold certainty of inevitability. Alien soldiers who once marched proudly under Council banners now deserted at the first rumor of human fleets. Civilians packed their belongings and fled to the outermost reaches of space, whispering the same words, "The humans are coming." Entire sectors collapsed without a shot being fired, not because of conquest, but because fear had hollowed out the will to resist. What no empire had achieved through centuries of campaigns, humanity achieved through reputation alone. Their name became synonymous with inevitability, their silence more terrifying than any declaration of war. Tribunals followed in the wake of fleets. The leaders who had ordered bombardments of Earth's colonies, who had signed decrees demanding submission, who had treated human lives as expendable resources, were dragged from palaces and bunkers. Some begged for mercy, others raged against their captors, but none escaped judgment. Humanity recorded their confessions, their denials, their final words, not as trophies but as warnings. Justice was not delivered in secret. It was broadcast across the stars so that every world would understand the price of arrogance. The Council itself, once a monument to galactic unity, became the symbol of failure. Its grand chamber, where countless decrees had been passed with smug certainty, was stormed by human soldiers. Delegates were paraded before the galaxy they had ruled, stripped of the authority they had wielded to destroy. Humanity did not kill them immediately. Instead, they forced them to face the ruins of their empires, to watch as their fleets burned, their monuments toppled, their power disintegrated. Death was the final act, but humiliation was the prelude. For the survivors across the galaxy, a lesson took root that would never be forgotten. Humanity had not simply fought back. They had redefined the terms of existence. Negotiation was no longer the shield of tyrants. Power was no longer measured in fleets or wealth. Consequence had become the law, and humanity its enforcer. Every species, ally or enemy, knew that the humans carried memory like a blade, and once it was drawn, nothing could stop its strike. What made this reckoning unforgettable was not its brutality alone, but its discipline. Humanity did not descend into chaos or endless slaughter. They did not burn every world indiscriminately. Their strikes were targeted, their campaigns methodical. They sought those responsible, those who had rejoiced in the suffering of innocents, those who had orchestrated massacres. For all others, the message was different: live, remember, and never repeat what you witnessed. Humanity's vengeance was not random destruction, it was structured justice, carried out with ruthless clarity. The final days of the Council were not marked by battles, but by silence. Worlds once loyal to its authority cut ties, refusing to fight on its behalf. Allies withdrew, unwilling to share in its punishment. The humans did not need to destroy the Council. The Council destroyed itself under the weight of its crimes, humanity only accelerating the collapse. When the last star system loyal to the Council fell, no resistance remained. The galaxy that had once scorned Earth now lived under the shadow of its triumph. When the reckoning was complete, humanity's fleets stood unchallenged, not because they sought empire, but because none dared oppose them. The sentence they had spoken at the beginning, "Until revenge is complete, there will be no negotiations," was fulfilled. Revenge had been taken, justice delivered, debts paid in fire and steel. Only then did humanity allow silence to replace war, not because they had been persuaded, but because their purpose was finished. The galaxy would never forget what followed. Records of battles, broadcasts of tribunals, images of burning fleets, all became the chronicles of a new era. No empire would ever again look upon humanity as fragile, no council would ever again assume they could act without consequence. The memory of vengeance became the strongest deterrent in history. Humanity did not need treaties to guarantee its future, it needed only the weight of its reputation. Thus the reckoning ended not with compromise, but with a truth carved into the fabric of the stars: humanity does not bow to oppression, does not forgive betrayal, and does not negotiate until justice has been delivered. The Council had begged for peace, but peace is never born from begging. It is born from respect, and respect had been earned in the most absolute way possible, through vengeance that reshaped the galaxy forever.